Be cautious when working under the hood. If the engine has been running, components will be extremely hot, so be careful what you touch. When working around a running engine, it is important to be alert and never wear loose clothing or a necktie that can get tangled in belts, pulleys, or the fan. And always, remember to wear your safety glasses.
We're going to check the cam sensor wiring harness on our Isuzu. I've taken the hood off so you can see what we're doing, but that's not required in order to do this procedure. Now what we want to do is check the wiring harness to the camshaft sensor. Now this is one sensor. It's a little bit difficult to get to compared to some of the others. As a matter of fact, there's the wiring harness right here. It goes into the main engine harness, goes across the front cover and goes down. One nice thing about the wiring harness on this Isuzu is it actually has factory disconnects so you can disconnect the wiring harness. But we'll get into that a little bit later. I want to show you something else too. We had mentioned the TP sensor. Now the TP sensor, the wiring harness for that is right here. So it's basically real easy to get to. As a matter of fact, let's unplug it. Just take a look at it, and you see there we have a 3-wire sensor. We have the 3 terminals, and this is what we're going to look for. We're going to look for any kind of condensation, any kind of corrosion built up in the sensor. Also, as you can see, this even has a weather seal on the connector to stop moisture from getting in there. You want to make sure those are in place. Let's go ahead and reconnect that. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and take our duct out of the way, the air duct, and that'll allow me to get to the plugs on the other end. And also, once the duct's out of the way, I want to take the top cover off the valve cover here. It's got a plastic cover, so I can get right to that connector for the camshaft sensor. So what I want to do is go ahead and take the duct off here. It just basically unsnaps from our air box. We have our air intake sensor. We'll disconnect that. We've got our hose for our power brake booster. We'll get that out of the way. Okay, go ahead and take the air hose off. And also take our clamp off the throttle body. Well, now that we have the air duct out of the way, one thing you want to do with the throttle body being open, let's go ahead and put a rag over that so nothing accidentally falls in there. Okay, now you can get a better look at our wiring harness. The next thing we'll do is go ahead and take off the top cover. With this top cover off, it also gives us access to our spark plugs and spark plug wires, so if you're going to tune this engine up, you would take this off. Now there's no gasket or seal on this, it just basically sits over as a shield over the spark plug wires. Okay, now here we are. There's our 4 plug wires, and there's our camshaft sensor right down here. Okay, so what I want to do is disconnect the plug. This has got a spring clip that's actually locking the plug onto the sensor so it can't accidentally come off. And that's one thing we want to look for, is to make sure it is snapped on all the way, which it is. The next thing we'll do is go ahead and depress our spring clip. It's like a little wire, and pull it straight up. There we are. Okay, there's the connector for the camshaft sensor. This is a 3-wire sensor, so it's going to have ground, voltage, and then the return, or the sensor wire to the computer. Now this is one end of the harness right here where it's going on to our sensor. What I want to look for is any kind of corrosion inside of the sensor. Now one way to determine if you have corrosion or not is it'll be like a greenish tint to it. Something else to keep in mind, like we were talking about on the TP sensor, there's the rubber seal. If you look inside there, you can see like an orangish color seal. You want to make sure that's in place. That stops moisture from getting into that connection. With my sensor being exposed now, same thing there. I want to look at my terminals, make sure none of them are bent. Sometimes you'll actually see a terminal will be broken off, so there's no way that it's going to work correctly. With this disconnected, my wiring harness goes across the front over here, and over here to these 3 plugs. Now what I want to do next is go ahead and take my power steering reservoir out of the way, then I go and disconnect these 3 plugs. This is really nice because it does have this breakout feature, because what I can do, I can go to our cam sensor connector and actually probe one terminal of the cam sensor connector with an ohm meter and come over here to our plugs and probe that connection here, and that'll tell me if there's any resistance in a wire. Now, why is that important? Because the engine's mounted in rubber and the wiring harness is pretty much fixed to the engine. That means it's stationary. But there's a loop down there where the harness goes from the engine to the body of the vehicle. In that loop, there's a good chance that that could be broken. So this test that we're about ready to do will determine whether or not we have a problem with the wiring harness from the connectors to our sensor. Okay, there's our 3 wiring harness connectors. This is the engine side of the harness, and that's where we want to do our test. So what I want to do, take our DVOM again, put it on ohms scale, and we're not going to read voltage, we're actually going to read continuity. That's going to tell us whether or not we have a break in our wire or any resistance in a wire. So we take one end of the DVOM and we'll probe this terminal. You want to be careful you don't damage the terminal when you probe it, because then we'll create a new problem. All right, we've got one end connected, and you can see right now we're showing an open circuit because basically it is. We have the other end not connected to anything. Now this is where the all data came in handy. It told me that on this green plug here, and I'm looking at this, and I'm looking for a blue wire. As a matter of fact, that would be my wire right there. It's right next to this yellow wire. So what I want to do, I want to go to the terminal side of the connector, and I'm just going to touch that, probe that, and if you look at our meter, we're showing 0 resistance in this wire, so this wire is in good condition. Now this is from this terminal to the terminal on the camshaft sensor. I want to do the same thing with the other 2 terminals. So the same thing, I'll probe the second terminal. Be careful not to bend the terminal, there we go. And we'll come over to our harness. Okay, if we turn our connector over, we've got the blue, we've already checked that connection, the yellow, and now we've got the red wire. That is the wire we want to check. So the same thing, we go inside of our connector body and just touch that terminal. And again, we have no resistance at all in that connection, so that circuit is also good. Okay, our final circuit, okay, this is our third and final connection. We've got it probed. And now we skipped colors of plugs. The first 2 we checked were on the green connector. Now we're going to go to the black connector, and we're looking for a yellow wire. As a matter of fact, it's right next to a black and a yellow. You see the black and yellow, and we have the yellow. It should be this connection right here. So the same thing. We touch the terminal of the connector, and there we are. Okay, all 3 circuits coming out to the camshaft sensor are good. Now this is from this connection to our plug connection. Now the wiring harness going to the processor or the computer would be checked basically the same way. You'd go to the connectors, the female connectors out here, and onto the processor plug. Well, the wiring to the processor, the computer inside, everything in there checks out fine. So basically, I don't have a problem in the wiring harness at this time. The next thing to do now is to put all of the connectors back together, basically reassemble the engine compartment, and then I want to go back inside and I want to go ahead and clear the fault codes. And there we have it. You know, the thing is, so far we really haven't found anything that caused our code to set on this. But there's a good chance, just with our testing here, just disconnecting the connectors and putting the connectors back in, that may have even corrected our problem, as odd as that may sound. The thing to do now is we'll clear the codes, and if the light should return back on and we check it and that same code appears, then we'll have to go back into this again. If that would happen, I would suspect now that we would have a faulty sensor. The thing of it is, you just don't want to go ahead and automatically replace the sensor at this point, especially on a vehicle like this, because basically you're going to do the same thing as you would do to replace the timing belt. And if you do that without knowing for sure that you've got a problem with it, that'd be a waste of your time and also a waste of money. The nice feature of the code reader is it not only reads the codes for us, it can also erase the codes. Let's say that we did find a problem, we repaired it, you'd want to clear the codes. Well, the same thing with the intermittent. We can go ahead and clear the codes, test drive the vehicle, see if the check engine light comes back on. If it does, we can reattach the code reader and find out which codes returned. Let's go ahead and clear the fault codes. To do that, it's real simple. The same connector we were at before, we reconnect. We want to turn the ignition on, but not start the vehicle. Okay, on our main menu here, we're going to select Erase Codes. We'll press Enter. It's going to link to the onboard computer. It's asking us whether or not we want to erase the codes. So we want to select Yes. And it's asking me verify the engine is off and the key is on, and then press Enter. Right now it's erasing the fault codes. Okay, the erase is done. We'll press Enter. Now we're back to the main menu. The next step is to go ahead and unplug our code reader and test drive the vehicle.